Hello YouTube, this is Kevin Miles. Wanted to talk just for a couple of minutes, especially to those of you who are activists out in your communities who are dealing with the issues of racial profiling. And I'm actually going to do a whole series of videos just kind of talking about some strategies that we've seen in terms of, or best practices that we've been able to gather from various communities around the country about how to deal with specific issues. But I wanted to start today with racial profiling, and for those of you who have visited my channel, you'll see that we actually have a video on the channel that is an interview with a gentleman by the name of Aaron Patterson, who filed a racial profiling complaint with us that we're in the process of trying to get adjudicated. But specifically for those of you who are dealing with the issue of racial profiling, I wanted to talk briefly about the definition of racial profiling and to try to shine a light to help you avoid some of the traps that that present themselves when you deal with this issue. The first trap when you deal with the issue of racial profiling is people really tend to have a distorted view of what racial profiling really is. And because they have a distorted view of what racial profiling really is, people don't have a good grasp on how it affects people's daily lives, how prevalent it is, and what needs to be done about it. People tend to think that this is something that largely just deals right now with Middle Eastern people coming through the airport, when in reality this is something that that all of us can relate to, certainly within the African American community, but others as well. You'll hear, as we've heard, we pushed really hard over a number of years to get some legislation here in the state of Kansas dealing with racial profiling, and we were successful. We have a racial profiling bill that was signed into law in 2005 by Governor Sebelius, which outlaws the practice of racial profiling. However, the practice still continues because the law enforcement community, along with the court system, seems to have a differing interpretation of what racial profiling what should be considered racial profiling, and we're pushing to get that settled in the courts. But here's our perspective. The law enforcement community and the judges will tell you that racial profiling is basically a matter of what's in a person's heart. They say that if a law enforcement officer selects someone solely on the basis of their race for investigative activities or for police interaction, if you can prove that it was race and race alone, then it should be considered racial profiling, and nothing else should fit the bill. When you put it in that perspective, then you come out with a situation that is virtually unprovable. Because if an officer stops you and you ask them why they stopped you, unless they come out and say, "Oh, I stopped you because you were black," which we all know will never happen, then you would never have a case of racial profiling. And that's why for activists and for groups who try to deal with this issue, that's the difficulty that you come away with, because once you allow the issue to be so narrowly defined in such a way that it doesn't include any policies or practices of the police department themselves, but you turn it into a measure of trying to determine the subjective judgments of police officers, then you set yourselves up by backing a policy that can never be enforced. Racial profiling is, in a nutshell, the police tactic of using pretext stops. And the use of a pretext stop is something that is relatively common throughout the United States. Most police departments rely on pretext stops as a part of their policing strategies. And they'll defend it, and what they'll defend it by pointing to is a Supreme Court case by a gentleman named Whren, W-H-R-E-N, if you want to Wikipedia that. And they say that in the Whren case, in the Whren case, the Supreme Court ruled that pretext stops were legal, and that's a commonly held belief. However, it's not true. What the Whren case determined, they upheld things that were found. They upheld a conviction based on things that were found in a pretext stop, but they never actually ruled on the legality of the pretext stop in and of itself. And let me just go a little bit more on what a pretext stop is. A pretext stop is when a police officer sees a vehicle and they decide that they want to stop and search that car. So they'll pull behind that vehicle and they'll follow you for, sometimes upwards of 10 miles or so. And they'll follow that vehicle, waiting until you make a relatively minor traffic infraction. And then on the basis of that traffic infraction, then they pull the vehicle over. And then they, ask to initiate a search. And sometimes if they don't get consent to initiate the search, then the officers may cite probable cause, saying that they smell marijuana or any number of things that would allow them to go ahead and search that vehicle without your consent. The three factors that we've found that are most commonly used to effectuate a pretext stop. You're driving down the street, a police officer pulls up behind you, you look up 5, 10, 15, 20 blocks later and that officer is still back there behind you. Then you get pulled over for typically one of three things. Either they say that your tires touched the center line, which you can't prove that they didn't. They'll say that you made a wide turn, which you can't prove that you didn't. Or they'll say that you signaled a turn, but you failed to signal at least 100 feet from the corner, which you also can't prove that you didn't. So that justifies the stop. Once you've been stopped, then they'll come up and, ask for a vehicle search, or they'll say, whatever they need to say to effectuate the vehicle search with or without your consent. That, we argue, is racial profiling. And the reason we argue that is racial profiling is because at the time that the officer singles out that vehicle, at the time that they look at your car and decide, hey, I want to stop and search that car, what information do they have at their disposal? They don't know that you have a license, that you have insurance. They can't tell that stuff by looking. All they know is they know what car you're driving and they know what you look like. And on the basis of that, if they make the decision that, hey, we want to stop and search that car based on knowing nothing other than what you look like and what car you're driving, that in and of itself should constitute racial profiling. Now, when they point to the Wren case and they say, well, in Wren, the Supreme Court ruled that you can use a pretext stop, that's not true. What happened in the Wren case is a group of young men were driving around in D.C. and they had crack cocaine in the car. The police used a pretext stop to stop that car. They found the crack cocaine, and the young men went on trial for possession of the drug, and the court upheld the conviction, saying that they weren't going to throw out the fact that these kids were found with the crack cocaine, but they never actually were asked to rule on the legality of the police officers following that vehicle and singling them out for investigative activity. So what we are asking, and for those of you who have watched our interview with Aaron Patterson or caught the information on our blog site, which is wichitanaacp.blogspot.com, we have been pushing to get a case into court that would specifically ask the judges and the legal system to rule on the legality of a pretext stop. To the degree that we are pushing as hard as we can, and we're bouncing up against every obstacle that is thrown in our path, the cause would be furthered if we had more people who were pushing for that same thing. So for any activists who are out there, if you're dealing with the issue of racial profiling, we would ask that you consider, as a part of your strategy, pushing the specific question to the legal system. We need to have the legal system rule on whether or not a pretext stop constitutes racial profiling. And the reasoning is, at the time that the decision is made to effectuate a pretext stop, the officers in question have no information. There has been no illegal activity that's taken place. There is no reason to believe that illegal activity will take place. They follow the vehicle until such a time as a minor traffic infraction legitimizes their decision to stop that car. So that is my brief discussion on racial profiling, and I'm hoping that you guys can help us out with that.